Turkey and Greece have a falling out. Ankara fumes after a Greek court grants asylum to a soldier accused of taking part in a coup attempt. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the soldier scandal across the Aegean. Both Turkey and Greece say they want their soldiers back, but for completely different reasons. Turkey accuses their troops of being connected to a failed coup in 2016, and Greece's failure to extradite them amounts to protecting terrorists. Meanwhile, 2 Greek border guards remain in jail, accused of trespassing on Turkish territory. But Athens says they're being exploited as bargaining chips. In the larger scheme of things, Turkey and Greece have a number of disputes going back hundreds of years, not to mention the recent territorial disputes over airspace and the island of Cyprus. So, are these 2 neighbours destined to be rivals? Natalie Perhonen reports.
A Greek court's decision to grant asylum to a Turkish soldier is testing ties between the nations. The Turkish government has accused that man and 7 others who fled Turkey with him of being terrorists who were involved in a failed coup in 2016. The men have denied any involvement and have repeatedly told Greek authorities they won't receive a fair trial if they're sent back. The Greek government had asked the court to reject the asylum bid, but the court granted it. Turkey's Minister for EU Affairs, Ömer Çelik, says the decision is the most embarrassing ruling possible for any country. The legal system in Greece ruled to protect the terrorists who attempted a coup to overthrow Turkish democracy. This notion has aligned against Turkey, along with the enemies of Turkey. The Turkish Foreign Ministry says the court made its decision in defiance of the rules of international law, and it hopes the Greek judiciary will refrain from repeating the same mistakes by taking similar biased decisions in the future. The Greek government has not commented on the ruling. The fate of the men has been top of the diplomatic agenda for Turkey. He is the Turkish Prime Minister in April.
We think that Greece should consider our enemy as their enemy and act accordingly. Therefore, it's unacceptable that members of FETÖ, who had actively participated in the coup in our country, are protected and welcomed.
The acronym FETÖ stands for the Fethullah Terrorist Organization, the name Turkey gives to followers of businessman and cleric Fethullah Gülen. While Turkey has asked for its soldiers back to stand trial, Greece has also demanded the release of 2 of its own who crossed into Turkish territory earlier this year. They've been accused of espionage, but have not been formally charged. Greece's Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, says there will be no exchange of the Turks for the Greek pair.
We call on our neighbor to leave behind this dead-end rhetorical escalation because it doesn't lead anywhere. When someone has problems in his own household, the worst thing is to pick on his neighbor.
In December, when Recep Tayyip Erdogan became the first Turkish president to visit Athens in 65 years, there were hopes that relations would improve. But this latest court ruling appears to have driven these neighbours further apart. Natalie Perhonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now on set is Turkey's former Minister for EU Affairs, Egemen Bağış. In New York, we have Kostas Panayotakis. He's an author and sociology professor at City University of New York. And from the University of Nottingham is European and Public Law Professor Aris Georgopoulos. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Egemen Bağış, let's begin with you. Why are you not happy with the way the Greek courts have ruled?
Greece has been a victim of military coup attempts in the past. They know how it feels when your democracy is attacked. Turkey went through a huge trauma on July 15th of 2016. Our ally, our neighbor, Greece, should not be harboring these terrorists who are responsible for more than 250 lives. Just like they returned the helicopter that they escaped with.
When you say terrorists, it sounds as if you're convinced that they're terrorists already.
I am 100% convinced that they are terrorists. They killed people, they attacked people, they used live ammunition to kill civilians, and more than 250 people died to protect their democracy, their stability, and their country's integrity that night.
Right.
What do you call those who kill civilian people? They are cold-blooded terrorists.
Let me ask Kostas. Kostas, do you support the Greek court's decision to give asylum to those that Turkey calls terrorists and wants back home to face trial?
Well, I mean, it's not for me to support or criticize. I think that it's up to the courts to make that decision. And I think I share the prevailing view in Greek society that, that courts should be independent and that this is part of democracy as well. I mean, I share the view that I'm opposed to coups, and Greece has had a, traumatic relationship, because of coups. But at the same time, at least as important for democracy is the rule of law and the idea that justice should be able to be independent of political pressures. I mean, the courts made that decision, even though this issue is a hot potato for, the Greek political system and Greek society, precisely because nobody wants a deterioration of relationships with Turkey.
Let me ask Aris. Aris, the fact that they were fleeing as the coup attempt was being thwarted, and they took that helicopter and they went to Greece. For many in Turkey, it's evidence enough that they were clearly soldiers involved in the coup attempt. Shouldn't that be taken into consideration?
That could be definitely one suggestion. The question is, as my colleague mentioned earlier on, when the process becomes a legal process and there are specific applicable legal rules that the courts have to apply, they are obliged to apply under international law, there is a certain level of evidence that is required before the court reaches a particular decision. Now, there is the context in which, and I totally understand to a large degree the position of departure of the minister, and I think the large majority of not the majority, all people in Greece. In fact, I was as the event were happening, I was in contact with friends and colleagues in Turkey, trying to see whether they are okay or how things they are, and the response of the Turkish people against the coup was remarkable. Having said that, what followed was, to a large degree, at least what has been reported, was and has been characterized as a purge, both in the military and other sectors. Now, and I think there is, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a Turkish proverb that we have a similar thing in Greek, which says that next to the dry, the damp will be burnt as well, meaning that sometimes people that they are not necessarily involved with wrongdoing simply because of the fact that they are nearby.
Certainly, and got the problem.
I have a question for Aris.
Okay, so Egemen.
When did they go to Greece, and with what kind of transportation?
Okay.
I think, if I remember correctly, they were in the night of the coup, if I'm not wrong, with a helicopter.
It's a military helicopter.
A military helicopter.
So
yes.
They used a military helicopter, which was used to attack people and be a part of the coup attempt. And then they escaped because they realized that their party had failed in achieving the coup, and they ran away using a government helicopter. My question is, why did Greece return the helicopter the next day? Because it belonged to Turkish government, right?
Absolutely, and I don't know what kind of military helicopter was that.
Why didn't they also extradite the contents of the helicopter the next day? Realistically,
by contents,
these
you mean
are
the people?
Military, Turkish military in Turkish military uniforms who have attempted a coup. They should have been extradited immediately along with the helicopter that they stole to escape to Greece. It's that simple.
Is it that simple to you,
Yeah.
Aris?
It's not that simple for two reasons. First of all, and the minister is much more informed than I am, of course. The military helicopter that with the one that the 8 officers, Turkish officers, fled to Greece. I'm not sure that to what extent it was a military helicopter for transport purposes, whether it was a military helicopter with the guns that could be used in the type of operation that the minister said. It seems, if I'm not wrong, it was a transport helicopter. But even if it wasn't, the fact that 8 members of the Turkish army fled, and let us assume, for the sake of the argument, that there was clear evidence that they have been involved in the coup itself, and there is clear evidence that the sort of smoking gun type of evidence that they have been involved. Under international law, they can still ask, once they fled to Greece, for Greece not to extradite them if they fear, under particularly Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights, that if they return back home, they will be subject to inhuman sort of type of
So Iris, let me ask you directly. Hold on, Egemen, just for a second. Iris, let me ask you very directly something, and then I'll get a response from Egemen. Do you believe that they will be subject to inhuman or inhumane treatment? Do you believe that they won't get a fair trial?
There are two different things there. The fair trial is an Article 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights issue, and there is the Article 3 that I mentioned, inhumane treatment.
Okay.
The only thing, and I'm not in a position to make that call, but we saw soon after, and I don't know if the situation had changed. I mean, it's up to particularly the government in Turkey to provide evidence to the contrary. But soon after, the first days or the day after they attempted the failed coup, where higher echelon officers they have been rounded up and they have been arrested by the security forces in Turkey.
Okay.
We have seen videos being leaked that show that they surely have been treated not in accordance with the standards of Article 3. This is the only thing that I know.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's bring in Egemen Bayish. Article 3 and Article 6, inhumane treatment and not getting a fair trial. Question marks over that from the Greek perspective. That's why they don't want to send these guys back.
First of all, Turkey is a member of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, just like Greece. So our military officers have responsibilities to work together and to protect each other. But when military officers of one ally starts killing innocent people, civilian people, and then uses a military helicopter, a government property, to escape to another NATO ally, it is the responsibility of that ally to say, what the hell are you doing here? And extradite them immediately. Coming to inhumane treatment issue, none of the Gülenists, although they deserve to be treated inhumanely, if you ask me, but they have been treated humanly because Turkey is a country of state of law. Turkey is a member of Council of Europe. Turkey is an aspiring candidate country for European Union. Capital punishment has been banned in this country since late 90s, early 2000s. Everybody is treated humanly. What he is referring to, some videos, is the civilian people who saved their own lives, caught these people and disarmed them, took their uniforms away, and then handed them over to the police for prosecution. That happened the night of the coup. Okay. And these guys were running away from Turkey after having killed 251 civilian individuals.
But we can't be certain that these guys in particular, these 8, were involved in killing, can we?
We are, in a way, certain, because why did they escape that night?
Right.
If they had nothing to do with the coup attempt...
But you would be open to that being answered in a court of law if they come back?
Of course. Yes. Everyone is questioned in a court of law.
Right.
From the 4-star general to the private
Got it.
that was serving under instructions that night. Okay. Everyone gets a free trial. Everyone gets to state their defense, and everyone is entitled to attorneys.
I want to broaden this out a little bit because there's a bit of tit for tat when it comes to the actions in recent times as well. And let me ask you, Kostas, because we've seen everything from diplomatic war of words to hackers on both sides, hacking government ministries and taking down different websites and so forth. Help me understand, Kostas, how Greeks see the situation of the 2 Greek soldiers that are in Turkey right now, and whether the Greeks see them as sort of bargaining chips when it comes to this case of these 8.
Well, it was interesting listening to the minister about making the argument that both countries are NATO allies, because that's precisely the argument that Greeks are using in the case of the Greek soldiers. And the argument from the point of view of Greeks, this kind of instances of Greek soldiers going to Turkish territory by mistake and Turkish soldiers going to the Greek territory by mistake was something that had happened for a long time. And the reason in this particular instance, this case has escalated, and these soldiers, instead of just routinely being returned within the day, like it used to happen, and you have the central government be involved in that kind of way, and there is a court process, and these soldiers are still detained after weeks, is viewed in precisely the same way. So I think the view from the Greek side is not that Greece is not performing the way NATO ally would sort of perform.
Right. Okay. So let me bring in Egemen Bayish here. Egemen, so the Greeks feel there's an honest mistake from 2 Greek soldiers crossing over into Turkish territory. I mean, many of the islands, for example, it's hard to tell where the border is, right? They cross over, it happens all the time, but because of the current political system, current political tensions, especially vis-a-vis the 8 that Greece don't want to extradite, Turkey is using these 2 as a bargaining chip. Does Turkey do that?
Well, first of all, let me make sure that our other guests understand that my view is not an anti-Greek view, or I have nothing against the Greek people or the Greek authorities, because as a matter of fact, the night of the coup, the first European leader to call me personally and ask me if President Erdogan was okay was the Greek commissioner to European Union, Mr. Dimitri Avramopoulos. And he personally called on many European leaders, including the president of the council, to take a stand in favor of democracy, and he personally came to Turkey right afterwards to share our sorrow. So I know that Greeks by far are our neighbors, are our allies, and they have good intentions for Turkey. But in this case, the 2 Greek soldiers that entered the Turkish soil, knowingly or by mistake, that's for the court to decide, they are accused of espionage because the phones that they had on their possession had pictures of some of the Turkish military sites. So they not only entered Turkey, they took some pictures of some classified areas of Turkey, some secret military areas of Turkey, and now they're being questioned for espionage, but Turkey has not granted them any asylum.
Right. Okay.
That's the difference.
So let me then ask Aris.
If the Greek authorities, if the Greek courts feel that those 8 Turkish soldiers were there spying on them, then they should be prosecuted.
Okay. So
but
let me ask.
If they are there because they escaped the coup attempt that they failed achieving, then they should be extradited for prosecution to Turkey.
Aris, just as you want Turkey to respect the Greek courts, and of course the Greek government to respect the Greek courts and their decisions, do you respect Turkish courts when it comes to the case of the 2 Greek soldiers?
One has to abide by the principles of the rule of law, but if they are respected and applied in a specific country, I don't have at the moment any obvious concern with regards to the process. The only concern that I have is that, and the minister will correct me if I'm wrong, the 2 Greek soldiers have been in custody in the Turkish high security prisons in Edirne, but actually they there have not been any charges against them. Of course, that is allowed. This long period of detention without charge is allowed unless, if I'm not wrong, under the Turkish legislation. Whether this complies with the standards of the European Convention of Human Rights, we will soon find out, because I think if the process continues like that, I would not rule out some type of a case before the European Court of Human Rights. And to finish my sort of answer to this, it would be the first time, I think, in human history where espionage will be carried out in full military uniform with all the insignia, the military insignia. Right. I haven't heard of that espionage attempt anywhere before.
Good point, right, Egemen? Why would they do it as soldiers?
Normally, if Greek soldiers walk into Turkish areas, they would be returned immediately, because, as it was said by Kostas, sometimes they actually lose sight of the border and they walk into the wrong side. And this happens on both sides. Both Turkish soldiers sometimes enter the Greek properties, Greek soil, and sometimes Greek soldiers enter the Turkish. The fact that they were detained this time is because of their activities that took suspicion and the contents of their
for those
phones.
Greek people,
that's what I read from the media.
Okay, but for those Greek people who believe that it has something to do with the suspected FETÖ soldiers, would you pour cold water over that and say it has nothing to do with it?
Well, I don't know the contents of both cases. I don't know the details, but
for those who say the Turkish government is just using them as bargaining chips.
No, that would not make sense. I mean, Turkey and Greece have a lot to share. We are neighbors. We have, there are so much that unite us than divide us.
Can we get out of this tangle diplomatically?
This was said to me by mayor of Salonika once. He had said that in EU, we are partners with countries like Denmark or Sweden. But with you, we're cousins, and you don't get to choose your cousins. We have the same culture, same music, same attitude. Food.
Similar food.
Exactly. So I am sure in the long run, we will solve our differences.
Is it going to be easy to get out of this tangle, because it's a big tangle?
It shouldn't be that difficult, because common sense has to prevail. Unfortunately, what really poured fuel to the fire was Prime Minister of Greece told our Prime Minister the day after these terrorists entered Greece, they would be extradited immediately. Right. And unfortunately, the courts took a totally different attitude, and
independent courts
sometimes feels like forces outside of Greece were involved.
But isn't it an example that they have independent courts and the government can't touch them?
Maybe some other governments are touching them.
Really? You suspect that? Okay, gentlemen.
That's my feeling.
Okay, we're out of time. But it's been a pleasure having this conversation. I think it was an important conversation to have. Egemen Bash, Kostas Panayotakis and Aris Georgopoulos. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, is the Italian president saving his country's democracy or blocking the will of his people? And we ask this women's rights activist why she says the Lebanese election was rigged against her. Italy's president could tolerate a populist prime minister, but a Eurosceptic to run the country's finances, that was Sergio Mattarella's breaking point. Described at times as invisible, Mattarella has thrown the country into political chaos by rejecting the government's pick for economy minister. The populist coalition failed to form a government and blames the president, saying he should be impeached. Meanwhile, Mattarella has appointed a former IMF chief to be the interim prime minister. So, has Italy's president intervened to preserve the European Union while blocking the will of his own people? Shoaib Hassan reports.
An unexpected turn of events. The bid by Italy's newly elected populists to form a government failed quicker than it emerged. The alliance between the Five-Star Movement and the League crumbled after President Sergio Mattarella invoked his constitutional right and rejected their cabinet nominee.
La designazione del Ministro dell'Economia costituisce sempre un messaggio immediato di fiducia o di allarme per gli operatori economici e finanziari. Ho chiesto per quel Ministero l'indicazione di un autorevole esponente politico della maggioranza, coerente con l'accordo di programma. Un esponente che, al di là della stima e della considerazione per la persona, non sia visto come sostenitore di una linea più volte manifestata che potrebbe provocare probabilmente o addirittura inevitabilmente la fuoriuscita dell'Italia dall'euro.
The move won approval from EU leaders, who had been alarmed at the rise of the Eurosceptics.
I have full trust, as I believe all Italians have, in the Italian institutions, starting with the Italian president, that is the guarantor of the Italian constitution, that is a wonderful constitution, very solid. So I'm confident that the Italian institutions and the President of the Republic will prove to be, as always, serving the interest of the Italian citizens. That, by the way, coincides also with the strength of the European Union.
Unsurprisingly, the populist coalition and its supporters are outraged.
He said no. He said there will not be a government. We worked for nothing. We will have a technical government. I asked, are we a democracy? In Italy, do the Italians decide or do the Germans or French decide? It is absolutely incredible from my point of view.
Others were relieved.
I am absolutely pro-European, and I believe that Italy is connected, must have a connection with Europe for our future. I am a mother of a boy who has to travel the world, and so I am convinced an anti-European minister is not the right thing for Italy.
The president says fresh elections are likely to be called, as Five Star and the League are promising protests across the country. So, has the president ignored the will of the people with his decision? And will it result in a strengthened European Union? Or does it do further damage to the bloc? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Rome is Marco Cecchini. He's the former spokesman for the Ministry of Economy and Finance. Also from Rome is Andrea Sarubi. He's a former MP with the centre-left Democratic Party. And from London, we have Robert Alls. He's the director of the Bruges Group, a Eurosceptic think tank. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Marco, let me begin with you. From the outside, it seems as if President Mattarella has made a decision on behalf of the EU and the Eurozone and not on behalf of Italians. Is that true?
No, absolutely. Mattarella took in consideration the probable effect of a government that is characterized by a strong anti-Euro attitude and probably the intention of coming out Italy from Euro. That could be a disaster for Italy and could be a disaster for Italian savers. That means that in a minute the Italians would have lost their savings. And so that is the action of Mattarella was to protect the savers from an initiative that is against the Constitution, against the European treaties that Italy has subscribed, and it's perfectly legitimate.
Okay, let me ask Andrea Sarubi. Andrea, even if Italians would have lost their savings, even if it might not have worked out, this is what they voted for. They voted for the people that they put in office. The president went against it.
Well, actually, it's not really like this. It's a little bit more complicated. I would say that we have to remember first that the two parties that now are together, which are the Five Stars movement and the Northern League, they were competing against each other at the elections. So people who voted for the Five Stars didn't like the League. And people who voted for the League, they mostly liked Berlusconi because they were allies, and they disliked Cinque Stelle, the Five Stars. Then their agreement was a post-electoral agreement. So it was something very, I would say, parliamentarian, something that happens in any Western country, and something that really Italy is used to, because we've been having post-electoral alliances for years, and I would say decades. But now they want to, they want to convince people that that was the will of the people. It was just the will of two political parties.
Okay.
One of them decided to leave the alliance and join the other, and that was it.
Okay, let me ask Robert Olds. So Robert Olds, what we're hearing basically from the other two Italian guests is that you have the League and the Five Star Movement both signaled that they wanted to leave the euro. They were Eurosceptic. They might have wanted to even, leave the European Union. It might have possibly collapsed the economy. The president, Mattarella, decided to act fast in order to safeguard his nation, and it was all constitutional. Is that how you see it?
Oh, this is typical of the European Union, where, of course, people will object to European Union politics and they're made to vote again. If there's a government that's put in place, be that in Greece or in Italy, of course in Greece with Papandreou, who was promised a referendum on the austerity measures, he was eased out. In Italy, of course, the European Union pushed for a change of government. And now, of course, we learn that Wolfgang Schäuble, who's German finance minister, European Union were pushing the president of Italy to make sure this person did not get the job. Basically, the people of Italy voted for this outcome. As you made quite clear, people voted for a Eurosceptic, or two Eurosceptic parties. People in Italy, quite frankly, had enough of the European Union's failed policies, which are not working for Italy, and they want a change of direction. The European Union's response has been to push harder on the fiscal compact and the growth and stability pact, and now, of course, really have a coup d'etat in Italy, in a sense, using obscure constitutional powers that belong to the president, which are very, very rarely used to
bring in Marco.
make sure that it toes the line and does what it's told.
Okay, towing the line. Okay, fair enough. So there's a populist fervor at the moment across the continent. Marco, isn't this only going to further strengthen the populists, especially since there's a new election on the horizon? Surely the Northern League and the Five Star Movement are going to get more support now because the people felt that their last vote didn't count.
Well, let me add just one thing to what the former guest said. So at the last election, Lega and Cinque Stelle collected in total about 49% of the voters, okay? And, but the participation to vote amounted to 64%, more or less. So
that's the same
at the end,
election. Any government, it doesn't have legitimacy because there was people that didn't vote. Please do not play those games. We see in Germany coalitions emerge. In Italy, we never say, oh, Angela Merkel, you can't rule in Germany. You can't be Chancellor of Germany because people stayed at home and you formed a coalition. Come on. It's quite clear that the people of Italy voted for these parties largely for a number of reasons. Immigration is one. Also, of course, better social protections, which can't be delivered whilst the European Union is forcing austerity measures.
Fair enough.
Policies which
Marco,
the Italian economy.
Marco, you can't use low turnout as an argument. That's according to Robert. Go ahead, Marco.
No. Can I conclude my point?
Please do.
So the two parties, the two populist parties, do not represent a majority of Italians. They represent a minority of the Italians. They represent a majority of the Italian voters, but not of all the Italians. So this is a point we have to take in consideration. And as far as the question on possible increase of the populist party in the next election, it's possible. It's quite possible. But it's even we are going to have a war between people against euro and people in favor of euro. And at the end, we don't know what the Italians will decide. And remember what happened in Greece, where Tsipras called a referendum on the participation to European Union, and the population, even if it was affected in a bad way from the measures of the European Union, voted to remain in the euro.
Well, actually, they voted. On the other hand, Marco, Tsipras, they had voted, Marco, not to take on new loans, and Tsipras ignored that vote. in 2015?
That was fake news,
Well,
we just heard.
I think...
Hold on.
Voted against the European Union's proposals.
Marco, so just for clarification, Marco, the people voted against further austerity and against further bailouts. Tsipras ignored that referendum.
Yes, but if you ask people, if you ask Italian citizens, okay, you are in favor or against austerity? Of course, they answer, we are against austerity. But if you call them, you want to stay in the euro or you want to leave euro? And if we don't know what they will respond.
Okay.
But if you tell them and you explain them the consequences of leaving euro, probably they will realize that the advantages of leaving euro are very, very, very low.
Okay.
And the disadvantages are so huge.
Let me bring in Andrea. Andrea Sarubi. So this upcoming election, if things go a certain way in Parliament as expected, and there's a new election called by Carlo Cottarelli, or rather, Carlo Cottarelli sort of ushers in this process, and then there's a new election. Is that election going to be basically European Union or not, or Euro or not? Is it basically going to be a referendum?
We don't know it yet, because it depends on Berlusconi and Salvini. Berlusconi, he was the former Italian Prime Minister, has been, I think, for like 4 times the Italian Prime Minister. And Salvini, he was his weaker ally. Now he's the stronger ally that he's got. And it depends on them, you know. If they plan they're going to run together, then it might be something different. But if Salvini leaves Berlusconi and joins Cinque Stelle, and they go together, the two of them, then you're right. In that case, it might be a sort of referendum pro or against European Union. And it's going to be something like, if you remember, I don't remember when, but it was like probably a decade ago, and it was Chirac against Le Pen, Monsieur Le Pen. And so France, they had this sort of Republican front all together versus Le Pen, and they won. And that's something that might happen too, but it's far too early to foresee. I mean, it depends on too many things. Right. What we know for sure is that now we're going to have a very weak government, but a very technical government. That's the way they call it. And they will not disturb the electoral campaign because they will only focus on current issues, and that's it.
Okay, so Robert Olds, an economist, Carlo Cottarelli, picked by the president, seen as a safe pair of hands, as a technocrat, somebody they called Mr. Scissors, who's going to present a new budget, presumably with a lot of austerity. Tell me why, I'm presuming you think it's a bad idea.
First of all, this isn't the choice of the Italian people or technocrats imposed from above at the behest of the European Union. Isn't exactly going to fill the Italian public with confidence. And of course, the policies they're going to enact will, of course, be checking this budget by the European Union, by the European Commission, as they must. And of course, the European Central Bank ask the permission of other European states how they can run their own country. And so far, we see that in Italy, the euro hasn't been working, and these deflationary policies haven't actually delivered. The debt is massive in Italy, and unemployment has been grinding away. Italy should be forging ahead. It's a very great creative nation with a strong industrial base, particularly in the north. It can't take advantage of this because of the policies of the euro, which are foisted upon them. So really, Italy needs a change of direction, and the public clearly want to have a new direction. Putting in a technocrat is actually just going to be following the rules of the masters in the European Union, who are really dictating to Italy. They've done this before. They're doing it again. There comes a point when the Italian people should say, enough, we'll run our own country to our own best interests.
Okay, so let me pose some of that to Marco. Marco, the point being from Robert that the euro hasn't been working, the economy has been sluggish, youth unemployment at 35%. He calls it the masters of the European Union. So he's talking Brussels, he's talking Paris, he's talking Berlin and others. Is your sovereignty in question here as Italy? Do you have to go along with what Robert calls your masters, who are the bigger, more powerful countries on the European continent, or pay the consequences?
I totally disagree with this analysis. for two reasons. First of all, Italy is not in the condition to be alone in the global context. Italy is a medium economic and political power. The idea is that in the global economy you can't stay alone. You have to be together. And look what happens in Great Britain. You know, the Brexit is making bad consequences in Britain. And companies are leaving.
Record low unemployment. More fake news. Please, we have record low unemployment. We still have low interest rates. The FTSE 100 index has been at record highs. We have more tax revenue. We have more foreign direct investment.
So Robert believes that Brexit has been good for the economy. Okay, fair enough, Robert. Marco.
Fake news.
Marco, Robert believes that Brexit's been good for the economy. He believes independence is more valuable than what you want. Let me then adjust that point to you very finely, Marco, and ask you, is it possible that while being integrated with these bigger economies, the likes of Italy and Greece and other countries have to carry too heavy of a burden to bail out, the banks from the bigger countries? And that's one of the problems that the Italian voters have.
The union, the economic union, and the participation to euro request some cost. Do you remember in 2003, The Economist came out with a cover with this headline, Germany, the sick man of Europe. Germany was in a disaster situation. It was, the growth was lower than the growth in Italy and in other countries. But at the end, the Schröder government decided to make structural reforms. They reformed the labor market in a heavy way. And at the end, now Germany is much stronger. Italy participated to euro without taking in consideration the cost of euro. If there was a problem with euro, that was at the beginning. Probably Italy had to stay out for a couple of years, adjusting its economy, and then join the other economies in the euro. Okay. But now you are in and you can get out, absolutely.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching Italy very closely. Lots of uncertainty at the moment and possibly new elections ahead. Chaotic in Italian politics. To some people, it's just Italy being Italy. We'll have to wait and see. Robert Alls, Marco Cecchini and Andrea Sarubi, I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers.
I want to know what happened between yesterday and today, and why today in the registration committee's room, our delegates and the election monitors were sent out, and they closed the door with the excuse that the system went down for an hour. What happened in that room for the results to change? We need answers.
Inhumane Haddad is a women's rights activist, poet, and once publisher of a controversial erotic magazine in Lebanon. Now she's filing a lawsuit to try and overturn the results of her failed bid for a seat in Lebanon's parliament. The prominent author ran as an independent candidate in the general election held earlier this month. Preliminary results showed she had won. She made the announcement herself, but the next day the final tally told a different story and her supporters are crying foul. Well, let's talk to Inhumane Haddad herself, who joins us from Beirut. Great pleasure talking to you and having you here on The Newsmakers, ma'am. So tell me, why do you think they took your seat away from you?
The first reason would definitely be because we're in Lebanon. I mean, that says a lot. But you mentioned that I had won in the preliminary results. Actually, these were not preliminary. These were the actual counting of votes that happened in the centers, in the voting centers themselves. But once those voting boxes had been moved and recounted by the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Interior. And after the system, for some reason, broke down, that's when the actual result changed. So it was not a preliminary result. It was more a result that was quite final, but not officially announced yet.
Now, Jumana, they say you jumped the gun, that there was an unofficial count, and then the next day in the official count, we found that Antoine Pano surpassed your numbers, and that's all there was to it, no more, no less. Tell me why you disagree with that.
Well, because the party to which Antoine Pano belongs had itself announced my victory and the victory of Paula Yacoubian. And it was still the case till early at dawn. So I have the right to have many question marks
Sure.
about what happened. And if they say so, it doesn't mean it's true.
Right. Looking at the numbers, still very few women in parliament after this general election. Lebanese politics still seems to be heavily dominated by men. Is that by design?
Well, obviously, we are living in a patriarchal society where women are told ever since they're kids that politics are a man's world, a man's thing. So they do not encourage women to participate in politics, but that's not the only reason. I think that another important reason is that the parties themselves, the ruling parties now in Lebanon, did not really comply with our call to have a quota for women, which is an important stage in order for us to be more involved in politics, to have people have more, women in politics to look up to, but they didn't agree on that. They didn't want anyone telling them who to put forward and who to not put forward. So they refused, and they used the argument that women in Lebanon are so advanced that they do not need a quota in order to run for politics. Obviously, after having 4 women in parliament for many years and now having just 6, we do need the quota.
Right. You mentioned those political parties. They're deeply entrenched political parties, and for many, their political party is connected to their religion or their sect or their identity, right? In retrospect, because you ran as an independent, do you feel maybe you should have perhaps gone into one of the vehicles of one of the main political parties and tried to join one of them instead of running as an independent because they're so big and so powerful?
No, definitely not. I mean, at least not for me. I'm not one to compromise on such things. I was running against this ruling order of things, against all these confessional systems that are ruling our country, and I wouldn't have any credibility in my own eyes before the credibility in the eyes of those who would have voted for me if I had run with one of those ruling parties that do not respect equal rights for women, that do not respect the necessity for us to move forward to a civil state, that do not respect individual and public liberties. They are only using religion as a vehicle to have more control. So I would never compromise on that.
You built up all your credibility, your gravitas, your fame on your writing, your work as an artist and a writer and so forth. And being an artist and a writer, it puts you in a unique position in society. You get to be the court jester a little bit. You get to say the emperor has no clothes. You get to sometimes say things that other people are thinking but can't say. I wonder, why did you decide that you wanted to, beyond having that role as an artist and a writer, why did you decide you want to get involved in the dirty world of politics, which is about compromise and sometimes saying things you don't fully, truly believe?
Well, that was not because that was not politics for me. I think politics are a dirty business and a double standard world because of the people who are practicing it. And I was actually looking forward to being able to say the emperor has no clothes, looking the emperor in the eyes from inside the parliament instead of just having to point my fingers at the emperor with more distance between us as a writer and as a journalist. So I definitely was aiming at playing the same role, but also contributing more in trying to find solutions to our problems. Because one thing is saying what's wrong with us, which is very important, because the first part of healing is to admit that we are suffering from a certain disease, and we are suffering from a lot. But the second part of healing is definitely finding viable solutions in order for us to move to a real strong state. And this is what we lack. We lack a lot of will. We lack a lot of, interest. There is a lot of indifference, without generalizing, that is affecting the political parties, because they know they can always count on using the confessional instincts in order to gain back their seats. And this has to stop at some point. And I was looking forward to be part of that solution.
Okay, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Prime Minister Hariri and how easy or difficult it is to form a new government. But for the moment, I've got to move on. Jumana Haddad, it's been a pleasure talking to you here on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, the US says it lost track of nearly 1,500 immigrant children. Is Trump's White House guilty of neglect? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.